Hello and welcome back to Deconstructed. I'm your host Sam Animo Mackenzie, and Harry's not with me today because he doesn't have internet. So instead, I've got Freddie, the man that calls himself the Swiss Army knife of esports, and that's all I want to say there.
One time.
And we've also got Mr. UKCS Go, David Glenn, who's a very dear friend to the channel. And as you've seen by the title of this, we're going to talk about UKCS today, and we're going to talk about UKCS's place in CS2, because obviously in CSGO it's been a bit of a laughing stock, isn't it? And that was kind of changed by ITB making the Paris major quarterfinals, and then that all went a bit tits up, and that's kind of the way it's been for the UK in CS for the past 10 years. Just things going tits up, things going backwards, kind of not having the events, not having the players, and then even when they did have some players, Valorant released, and we lost some players then. So yeah, but why don't we start with Valorant, boys? And how much did, because obviously it happened in NA as well. So how much did Valorant split the UK scene?
Do you want to take this? I think it's fair. Actually, should we say as a little disclaimer, Daf? I don't think either of us were quite around during that period. So like, it is all hearing from like what it's clear to see what happened, but I wasn't directly in the scene at that time. I kind of came in during this period. I weirdly enough came in as everyone left. But basically, the TLDR of it is that you had Vexed, who were the team that were competing with Endpoint. That was like Mezzi. He's obviously still playing, but the rest of the team all went over to Valorant. So you, alongside quite a lot of other people, such as Eccles, and they played under like the Fish 123 and like Link and all them lot. Like they're still playing like in Liquid. They're doing really well now. But basically, what it did was it removed the whole of the tier 2 UK scene.
Freddie, not
Yeah.
one of them is on Liquid, mate.
I don't know. I don't know anymore. I don't follow Valorant. I don't know Valorant, but like I know they played on Liquid.
If I remember right, Eccles was on 100 Thieves for about a week and got kicked. Sorry, carry on.
There is one UK
yeah,
or maybe two still on Liquid, right?
potentially.
Solcast just left. He was the
Oh,
only
did
one.
you just leave?
Oh well, okay. Well, that's against the point. But basically, it's just from that point we are still building up and like building and putting the pieces together since when all those players left for Valorant, because it removed such a big part of our scene that you can't just instantly put players back in that position. So we almost had to like rebuild a little bit from the tier 3 up to like the tier 1 UK scene.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this isn't just a UKCS specific thing. This was the whole CS space, right? Valorant came out shortly after COVID hits, so you've got all these players leaving, and then all of a sudden you've got all the tournaments shutting down, all the LANs stopping, all the investment disappearing as well, and a lot of it heading into Valorant, a lot of it just falling flat because of COVID. And there were some solid players who left as well. I mean, Boaster, I think, won.
Yeah.
Can't remember what it's called. Is it Champions or something?
He's on the Fnatic team, right?
Fnatic,
He
yeah.
won Masters, Tokyo, and a
Tokyo,
couple
yeah.
other tournaments, lock-in, but they came 4th place at Champions.
Regardless, tier 1.
Yeah, solid player.
Oh, he's the best RGL in Valorant.
Yeah.
Right.
Most consistent since
so
the
we
game's
lost a
released.
lot of these players. But what it also did as like a positive, that we can look back on now, and as Freddie said, I was just a fan back then. I wasn't like invested in the scene like I am now. I was just watching from a distance. But what it did is it took a lot of these people and they moved on to Valorant, and during this online period, a lot of new fresh blood came into the scene. So we had a lot of youngsters come through, a lot of people just playing tournaments, grinding because they had loads of time on their hand. And this is when the big switch in CS came, really. And this is when UKCS kind of started to build back. And then after COVID, that's really when things started going again. But I'm sure I'm getting ahead of myself because you probably have a plan of how you want this to go. But that's kind of when the change happened.
Well, so I was gonna say, we have our little episode plan, and Freddie's added some notes to it of, that there was this tier 3 scene that's taken a while to grow, but now it's at a place where it's, kind of coming together. Fred, do you want to elaborate on that, and like kind of whether you mean a more like, is that coming together in the national sense, or is that coming together in the sense of what we saw in Paris, where ITB, yes, they were in the quarterfinals, but we also saw what were their names in the RMR, Irish lads.
Viperia.
Viperia.
Viperia,
That's it.
yeah.
I know they'd moved, so the team name went from my head. Where to me, those just having two UK Irish teams in an RMR was ridiculous.
Yeah. Also, something for people that might not know, UK and Ireland is grouped together. So when you say UKCS, it also includes like Ireland. So when we look at like Artis and the Viperia lot that were an Irish core, that counts as like UKCS in a sense. But so like building on Daf's point, there's a term that gets thrown around in the UK scene called the treehouse, which was basically all of these players were at the top of the scene and there was no trickle down information. That isn't really a thing anymore. You don't really have that treehouse. Obviously, you have like friendship groups and cliques, like every single scene does. But Valorant, a positive thing, did cut down that treehouse. However, what it didn't quite cut down was or add was the trickle down information. Like you look at all these different scenes. You'd hit the German scene, like all these academy teams, like Crystal coaching big academy when he's playing, when he's like on the bench of teams. Like you have a lot of these. Maybe in some people's eyes, they'd be like, "Oh, he's not a good player." Whatever. He has tier 1 experience. In the UK, we didn't quite have that of like people coming back and helping. That always has been offers though. Like Mezzi is incredible for the scene, and I think him getting to the top now has helped so many people because he actively just helps people. And then like Ash and Mighty Max and a lot of other people at the top now actively help a lot of other people. I know Cypher helps a lot of teams. But basically, like we're at the level now where it's something that Pete said to me in an interview, the owner of Endpoint, of just like we needed time, and like the time has come now. Like you look at the Raptors lot that beat Endpoint, you look at even Volt and Cypher mid top 8, like they weren't really a thing pre-Valorant. Like we're just having to wait for these players to come back in, and finally they have. However, it doesn't stop now. Like there is so much more to be done, and I think the trickle down of information is getting a lot better, but it's definitely something that needs to improve because we do still have not necessarily a treehouse, but definitely a top heavy scene where like you have 8-10 teams, and then that's just it apparently. Like there's just no one else. But there is obviously. We just don't have maybe like the infrastructure and the people to help down below. So we maybe have like a bit of glam on the top, but there's still loads of stuff that actually needs to get done. And I don't know if that quite answers the question because I feel like I'm going on tangents left, right, and center.
Well, okay, so this information is trickling down, which is a good thing because exactly it's what you see in other regions, and it's what I remember Warden once saying to me. It's what NA lost when CGS closed back in Source, and then it took years for NA to grow back from that, and it's having these more experienced players help lower down players is the most important thing. But Daf then, and be realistic, because you two, in the nicest way, you both smoke that good UKCS shit. You both
A little bit biased.
Definitely a
there's
little
some
bit.
copium,
Sure.
but who can be realistic?
Mm.
What does this information trickling down, this dismantling of the treehouse, what does it actually mean for UKCS in terms of where are the teams at, not on a national scale, because at the end of the day they're always going to be at their national scale even when
Sure,
they're
sure.
international. Like fucking Denmark used to have like the Copenhagen Games or whatever it is. They
Sure.
might still do. I don't know. Fucking. Who gives a
It's
fuck?
coming back.
Right. Okay. So it's coming back. So outside of that national scale, how far off we from having a team from the UK be able to, because the partner system's coming down in a year.
Sure.
How far off we like? Is it in that year? Is there going to be a team that once that partner system's down, they're consistently making events, that we consistently see a UK team at Lannon's?
See, Okay, I think that is an interesting question that I am going to answer it. I'm not sure. I don't think that is what UKCS is aiming for, right?
Yeah,
And
I'd
I know
agree.
that sounds like I'm dodging the question, but right now, that would be getting ahead of ourselves to just focus on like one team getting, to the top, because there obviously is the talent, but something that is really benefiting the UK scene right now is this move towards international lineups. It's perfect for the UK scene because in the UK we speak English. That's our primary language, and in all the teams we're all speaking English. This move towards international rosters, who are mainly speaking English, means that there is now a place for these teams to leave the UK scene, right, and take that next step. We don't need that one team like Denmark had Astralis and Heroic, right? If you wanted to be good in Denmark, you at some point needed to get to that top team. For us, we've never had that. We have Endpoint, obviously, that would maybe be the equivalent, and obviously ITB to an extent. But we've never had that, and because of the shift towards international play, once you get out of the UK scene, you can kind of move elsewhere. You can kind of go anywhere, right? And it's why we saw some UK players go to NA back in the day, because it's an English-speaking scene. We've always seen that, but I think rather what we need to focus on is what does make a successful scene. When you look at Germany, when you look at Denmark or Sweden, maybe not currently, but when you look back, what do they have? They have dedicated tournaments outside of ESL. So Denmark's run is run by DK, right? Right now we have UKIC run by Endpoint, which is doing really great stuff, and it has a LAN at the end of it. Great. They have LANs that are well run. We have Epic LAN, which is one of the biggest BOIOCs for CSGO in the world. It gets 20 plus teams going. You don't really see that very often anymore. Copenhagen Games doesn't exist, right? You don't see these BYOCs tournaments doing as well, but we have that grassroots start. We have coverage like UKCS go. So I think just building on that and building a foundation of where players can come up so that they can then get poached by the bigger teams, like Vacancy has now gone to Sprout Academy, right? If we can get that base so then players can go elsewhere, I think you are going to see more and more UK names appearing in top tournaments. However, I'm not sure if we are going to see a consistent top UK team in those tournaments, but you're definitely going to see more and more UK names.
So
Yeah,
not even like 3 players on a team together like
no,
ITB, like not even
no.
I think
That's just not going to happen
I think
in a long
Endpoint
time.
is the closest you're going to get to that, right? For now, but who knows? Some you might just like a bit like ITB. When ITB started, Thomas had never been in IGL. Volt and Cypher we knew were good players, but weren't really known elsewhere, right? And that is just a random 3 players coming together and doing really well. So you never know, right? You actually never know. There could be, it could be like YZO, who's a great youngster in the UK. It could be like Ignorak might come out of nowhere. He's a like 16-year-old AWPer, right? And then some experienced UK player joins him like Thomas. And then you never know. That 3 players might do really well, but I think if we're being realistic, if we're not smoking the good copium, you're going to see more individual UK players make these top tournaments instead of teams.
Yeah, that's always. I think it's really unrealistic for our scene to be like, oh, partner system's going to come down. That's going to mean we're playing tier 1. Like that's going to take a while. Like we're nowhere near that as a scene. I think, however, building like kind of agreeing with what that's saying. Like I really feel like though seeing a lot of international teams with UK players, especially in the next 3 years, is definitely going to be a reality because we have so many just really good individuals. Like Gizme, he's playing on the Prodigy's team. He's not calling right now. He should be calling. He's a sick caller and he's a sick fragger. You mentioned some names there. Like Igor's literally 16 playing like advanced. Like he's got like a year competitive playing under his belt. Like you've got all these other team, like people on the Raptors team that like they're eventually going to go and play at like a decent level. Vacancy, as you said, Sprout Academy. And like the list kind of goes on of like all these guys who are starting to play like a little bit higher and higher. But I think a general theme in the UK is that like you hit a certain point with a UK team and then you go international. And when I spoke to Volt, he was I was like, look, ever return to UKCS Go. And he was like, especially now that I've changed my flag to Romanian, there's even less of a chance because getting 3 other UK players and me is just not going to happen. And I think that's a reality we're going to have to face. And I think that's, to be honest, something that everyone kind of understands of like, you get to a certain level, RMRs of the Viperio guys, oh my God, that's incredible.
That's
However,
nuts.
it's always going to be, you're always going to hit a stint and like a ceiling, and you can only shatter that ceiling, I think, if you go international with like one UK player in a team. Mezzi, for instance, Cypher on TSM, that's kind of the general theme. Vault, Gamer Legion, like that idea.
So if we could stick with players for a moment then, and especially those 3 I want to focus on. You know, Mezzi, obviously he's a star of Fnatic. Now that Dex is there, I don't think anyone's gonna question Mezzi's ability. It's only a question of how good can he be. Maybe if he was on a team that was slightly more competitive. You know, like if JKS dropped off in G2, if I'm G2, I'm looking at Mezzi. But so
Sure.
outside of Mezzi then, and we can include Volt for the sake of it because he's a good lad. But so we've got Cypher, we've got Volt, and we've got that AZUWU fella at Endpoint
Sure.
who's been doing really well since being picked up by Endpoint.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
where are we at with like these kind of players? So obviously Volt, he's gone into more star roles and maybe he's struggling slightly. AZUWU, admittedly, I'd not watched much of, but what I've seen, he looks really good. And Cypher at the moment, it looks like what I kind of expected to happen after Paris is happening, and now there's more data on him, there's more demos of him, and like let's be fair, the kid was just a crackhead running up ramp, right? Like the dude's just running up, he's claiming a head or two, and occasionally he'd have his head ripped off afterwards. And since the move to TSM, he ain't looking as hot. So like, where are you two at with these players, and maybe any other players you want to mention in terms of will we see any, you know, get to where even Mezzi is?
Yeah. Like like I mean, isn't that kind of like Cypher also has I think people don't realize how like he knows the game ridiculously well. Like he second calls and he did that on ITB. Like he has the ability to potentially fall into somewhere along the career, like what an IGL, whatever. Like he's still super young. He's 2019. Like same with Seb. They're 2021. Like we're looking at these guys and we're expecting so much from them when Seb literally went from Fnatic Academy at the end of last year to here. Like it's been 10 months and he's played a top 8 major and a handful of S tier events. Like I think it's really unfair to look at that and any player, not even just UK, and be like, should be doing better and better. Volt, yeah, new positions, like it's big for him. And you've got all these other guys, yeah, like those two in isolation. I feel like, and Seb's also a very good second caller. I feel like it's, I think they're both like, just give them time. Like they'll probably be playing consistent tier 1. If not, they'll be a very, very prominent force in the tier 2 scene for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with Freddie. Time is important. They're both young. Also, circumstances, right? Like it's the end of CS:GO that they've been performing in, like these
Yeah.
tournaments that, you know, not to be harsh, but meaningless. Most of them. This the start to this TSM roster was messy to say at the least. You know, there were reports that maybe they weren't even getting picked up. You know, the build around Cypher is interesting with another very aggressive rifler who kind of mentioned runs up ramp and clicks head, right? You got 2 of them on one team. I think maybe Cypher's game will evolve now that he's on this kind of on this team with a great coach, and I think he's going to be asked to do more. He's not just going to be asked to, hey, Cypher, hold W. They're not going to say that to him because this is a coach with incredible experience who's probably going to want a lot more nuance from him. So he's probably adapting into those roles. To answer the question of like, are we going to see them in top 1 teams? Mezzi went to Cloud9 Colossus, right? And even though he was pretty decent on that team fell apart and he went to Endpoint, right? He went like back to UKCS and now he's the star on Fnatic. You know, even if it doesn't work out for TSM or for Volt, and they take a step backwards, I don't doubt their potential, and I think they will still reach that tier 1 height. I just don't know when that's going to be. I think the next year is going to be so important, and they're going to need to show some mental resilience. I don't think it's going to be easy. Let's be real. With the team that TSM have assembled, I don't think this team is going to reach incredible heights. So I think this might not be the roster that Cypher makes it big on, but he will make it big, and I believe that thoroughly. Not even just as a UKCS fan, but just we saw what he can do at Paris. Even if you
Yeah.
think it was a fluke, if he can reach that potential again, there's a place for him in Tier 1 CS.
Yeah. Also to build up from that, not sure how public it is, but TSM built this roster. A big part of the roster was built around Cypher. Like he is the one of, if not the only piece that is maybe more. He's got his place in TSM for a lot longer than just his team. Like they have obviously seen something in him, like all of us. I think that speaks quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if Harry was here, this is where Harry would turn around and talk about how someone in Cypher's roles is the easiest to give that initial display for
Sure.
yourself when people don't
That's
have the
fair
data,
enough.
and
That's
then
fair. Yeah, that's
it's the
fair enough.
easiest to fall into inconsistency and drop off because people kind of learn the rhythm of your
That
game.
Yeah, that's where I
Um,
see he gets better with the his calling. Like that's when he steps into maybe
but,
like a
but yeah,
second
right. Like,
caller, and that's when he gives more value outside of his fragging. And I think that's something that Seb can do really well in his star roles as well. Like they have so much more to offer than clicking heads. They just need to get into that.
well, this is where for Cypher, especially with uh the coach he has behind him now, is that's where, like Daf said, you can talk about the adaptations to your game, and Cypher can just become this kind of aggressive support player that someone's behind trading, or he can become this kind of like supportive site entry kind of IGL, the same way that you see a lot of tier 1 IGLs playing now that we've got rid of the stain of people like Nafany. So yeah,
That boom are doing well. That boom are doing well. They're off to
mm,
Sydney.
yes. Now, how did Cloud9 do, Freddie? But you know, it's not that there isn't space for these guys. It's just a case of they need to find that space because,
Sure.
like I really like Volt. I was actually very pleasantly surprised by how Volt was performing in the new roles on Gamer Legion. I'm still not convinced he's the man long term for those roles, and if I was him, actually, like right now, I'd been considering getting the fuck out of Gamer Legion.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a
Um,
lot of the things it seems like out like
because
there was
that
a whole
snacks pickup,
yeah.
Jesus
Well,
fuck.
because with Neelan, it was a whole new system. Like that wasn't Gamer Legion. Like I think people don't realize that like that isn't the Gamer Legion we saw at Paris. Like it was a whole different system, whole different everything.
Well,
Now
it
it's
has to
changed
be right.
again. I don't know. It's
They
hard
lost.
for Seb. Yeah,
They lost two very important players in terms of how a system's built. And
yeah.
Shuey and I mean, one of them builds the system, the other one had the system built around him.
Executing the system.
Um, but I didn't think Gamer Legion were bad. I would love to know why the fuck they decided to make that move, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So instead, let's move on to AZUWU then, because it seems right now, yes, Volt's the one playing at the tier 1 events, and yes, Cypher's the one on the historic org. But right now, for my money, it seems like this AZUWU kid is probably the best hope with how he's been performing on Endpoint at a pretty similar level outside of those lands that Volt's getting to play at. What's your thoughts with him and where his peak may lie?
I think the biggest thing that AZUWU has in his favor over the other two, no expectations. Like he is on Endpoint, who obviously in the UK scene, top dogs have been for a very long time, right? And they've dominated. They've won the most ESL national championships out of any team ever, right? They are the top dogs of the UK. And I'm sure there's expectations for him to perform for them. But outside of that, like there are no tier 1, pundits, commentators, analysts, journalists saying AZUWU needs to be the guy here. He, it's all on him, which obviously Cypher and Volt might be getting to a lesser extent,
Yeah.
right? They're getting, was it a fluke? He needs to perform. Whereas, AZUWU, he was pugging out on just UKCS rosters, and he was playing well, but now he's on Endpoint, and this is his chance to shine, but there is no pressure. So I think AZUWU's got a really bright future ahead of him, but I think it's slightly unfair to compare him to the other two when they have so much more pressure on their shoulders. That being said, I think he is also an aggressive rifler, right? And what you were saying earlier about maybe those are the easiest ones to get those easy stats. I don't know. I'm not a big stats guy, but just looking at the way he plays, he's just a good player. And
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to get the good stats with, because if that was true, then a lot more aggressive riflers would have a lot better stats, and that as well is down to system. Are they the aggressive support player? Are they the aggressive star of the team? But it's the one where typically when a team starts doing really well, like ITB, or when players start to shine, a lot of the time it is in those aggressive roles, because especially in the case of someone like Cypher, you could see Cypher was just catching people out a lot of the time, and once that becomes evident and there's more data and there's more demos, people do start to look at those demos of these players, and that's where you see them typically slip and find what ends up being their consistent level, and that's where
sure,
they end up on the teams they're meant to be on. And some players adapt, and some players don't. Like there was what was his name? He was on Avangard a few years ago. Like Fitch, I think his name was. Like he looked great when he came through, and then 3 months later he was dog shit, because it was just like everyone knew how he played now, and he didn't have it in him to adapt. But then you see other players like Nico. Like of course Nico's a freak example because of how good he is, but
Yeah.
he plays in those roles, and
Sure.
there's constant adaptation from him, and there's ways you can play these roles where you can just be consistent regardless. Dupree's got that as well. So, there's definitely the scope for AZUWU to do this, and the reason why I wanted to talk about him especially is because I think where he's at in terms of the entire UK scene seems to be the best place possible. Not just because it's Endpoint, and like you said, they've won the most, but it's also when you look at what Endpoint has done for players
yeah, I was
in the
just about to
last
mention this.
couple of years, and this
Yeah.
can be a good segue point into organisations and what the UK scene needs from its organisations. Like,
Mm.
in that sense, how important is Endpoint as a developmental org? And there's two people who know the inner workings of Endpoint a lot better than I do. How has Endpoint got to this position of being such a good developmental place for people?
There's like one small thing I want to just touch on AZUWU a little bit is like he's gonna excel so quickly and accelerate because of Endpoint. Like they're doing boot camps like every other month. Like they do
Yeah,
like 2 week boot camps. They're the
their
headquarters
own
now.
HQ. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of most teams in the world don't. Most tier one teams don't do that, for Christ's sake. Like they went to Prem and had like a 2 week boot camp afterwards. They go home for 2 months, come back again for another 2 weeks. Like he is consistently being excelled. This isn't something they've had before, though. This is a very recent thing. So this has not really come down to like when we look at Flames, Nerds, all those guys. Can't really use that same example. I think it's a very specific thing for like AZUWU and Heavy God and Slen now. But like this Endpoint roster, it's one for the future. They built it for a long-term strategy. It's very clear because AZUWU is a very unknown entity in regards to the international scene. With that said, though, Pete and Max have been looking at him for 2.5 years since he hit 3K elo. It's a lot of people under that same umbrella. But not diverging too much. So I think we could talk about that specific topic for a while. But Endpoint as an org have so much more. They've done so much more for the scene than just produce these individual players that end up going and making like the stuff they do for the UK scene is unparalleled anywhere else in the world. Like it is crazy how much they have continuously supported UKCS. They've always tried to have UK teams. all this crap, and everyone still turns around and goes, ooh, but an org shouldn't be running a tournament. Oh, fuck off. All those people out there is like, oh, Endpoint shouldn't be running UKIC because it's a conflict of interest. Why the fuck would Endpoint try and tarnish their reputation because they wanted to put Endpoint in a $2,000 prize pool tournament and win 500 euros off that? What are they trying to achieve out of that? And like, they're doing all these crazy things, and like, you literally look at it, and from an outside, if you actually look at it, you look at it and go, why? Like, why are they doing that? And Pete goes, because I love UKCS, I love CS. And then people turn around and give him crap for it. And like, yeah, the UK scene, like, you talk to anyone who's actually relevant in like a high up level in the UK scene, and they will do nothing but sing praises for UKCS. And for some reason, you have all these main and advanced players that start crying about them, and it's actually crazy.
Yeah, I think Endpoint are the villains, right? Because they had non-UK teams competing in a
Yeah.
UK tournament, and I think for that, kind of rightfully so that they were the villains in a way, right? You got to make them the villains, because then they go to Pro League and they wouldn't have a UK team, or they go to conference and they wouldn't have a UK team. But even then, they were always given back to the UK scene, whether it was behind closed door. They've always been good to UK CS:GO, for example. But they also do help out the scene a lot with running a tournament, but also just their development of players in and out of the UK scene is just crazy. Their scouting has always been incredible. And the thing is, it's a bit like a few Premier League sides where players will want to go there because they know they will develop well.
Yeah,
Right?
that's what like Flame said. He was like, oh my God, I can't wait to go.
People didn't understand why MHL went there, right? When he's coming off like Miles Next or whatever it was, where people already saw him as a good prospect, but it's because he knew going to that team he could develop, he could become even better, he could get good offers, because he knew that people know Endpoint has a good scouting system, Endpoint has a good development system. But just to segue into the thing you wanted to talk about, which was obviously orgs in the UK scene. I think it's really difficult to say they should look at Endpoint as an example, because Endpoint go above and beyond, right? Into the Breach have obviously now done their pipeline development, which I think could be quite interesting. This is where they're going to get UK players. They're going to come to all their boot camps with them. And I think the idea is that they loan them out to other teams, so they are still getting competition, but they are contracted to Into the Breach. It's an interesting idea, and I think.
Can I add on to that as well? So when they loan them out, they still pay their salaries. So the team they loan them out to don't have to pay their salaries.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's an interesting idea, and I think it's probably better than just doing an academy, because without We Play Now, especially, they just don't work. They don't mean anything, especially if you're competing in the same competitions as your main team. It just doesn't work, right? Especially as a low level team that isn't tier one, like Into the Breach. It just doesn't work to do that academy team. So yeah, I think there is good development happening in the UK scene. I would love for maybe like one more org to get the sort of investment that the other two have. I think Viperia will be the next one to do that, right? They just won a development plan in the north of the UK. They entered into a it's like you win a stipend if you win it, and they got a decent bit of investment from it. I think their business plan won over a lot of investors. So we'll see if that means that they get to invest more. But you see scenes that when they're very top heavy, when there's only two orgs doing anything and not trickling down, not running a competition, not loaning out players below, the scene eventually dies out because there's nothing growing beneath them. Look at Sweden and what it used to be versus what it is now, right? Like, they used to have so many players constantly coming up, but now the lower scene just isn't there anymore. It's a real shame. I do want to avoid that personally.
Kind of adding on that of you need to look at salaries. So you have Endpoint paying these full-time salaries. They're playing against Raptors who are on pennies compared to them. They're playing against ex-Coalesce, who literally don't get paid to play the game. But Verdant, honestly, not far off. And you have if you go all the way back to CS Source 1.6, you had a very big UK scene. You had Rattlesnake, you had UK teams competing in S-tier tournaments, the UK scene itself hosting a lot of tournaments. You had Rattlesnake winning like the majors in Source and stuff like that. And a big part of why they left was because there just was no money. Like I remember when I was like researching for something, I was like, what happened? What happened? And everyone I kind of spoke to went just like, nothing happened. They just moved on with their life. Like they couldn't continue. And that is actually kind of a reality we're hitting with UK scene now, actually. That's kind of maybe one of the biggest issues of like ex-Coalesce. They're one of our best teams, but they're playing part-time because they don't have the money to play full-time. You have these other teams. I don't want to drop names because I know it's private, but there was a team that almost quit playing competitively because they couldn't fund themselves. And they're supposed to be one of the best teams in the UK scene. But how are they going to be able to do that part-time or playing on not much at all? And we have such a big issue of like, there's been times you look at the top 5 list, 3 of them are unorged, and one's playing part-time and then endpoint.
And that one you mentioned was competing in Europe as well. They were competing in European competitions.
Most are.
It was like, I mean, like good European competitions as well, not the ones that are just like on Liquipedia for 100 quid, right?
Yeah.
Like, these ones they were competing in proper European competition, not like tier 1 or anything, but good European competition and not getting salaried, almost quit the game. Right?
And like you have ex-Coalesce who, and I think it's very easy to look at it from the outside and go, oh, they're making the main Swiss and playoffs of CCT. That means nothing. That's huge. That is literally like top 50, top 60 CS, but they're doing that off a couple hundred a month, or if anything, for nothing. And you have these UK teams that are, if anything, unable to focus on actually playing the game. A lot of them are still students, I think Gizmi's at uni or something like that. And he did his A levels. You remember that interview did that? Like he was doing his A levels while winning international lands, while being paid not much at all, or if anything, actually, I think on eco. And like this is the big problem of UK scene of like you go to these events and you see, oh my god, Raptors, like that's amazing. Pap has a full-time job, their coach. He's part-time CS, and the rest of them are either at school or cannot afford to play full-time because they don't get paid to play full-time. Yet, if we see them at the level where they can beat Endpoint on LAN, imagine if they were playing full-time.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because it's kind of what you're seeing in NA, and I actually think on a smaller scale we're very comparable to NA at the moment, where there's so many of these teams that maybe could be so much more because they already get impressive results, but they just don't have the fucking chance to be more because they sit there and it's like, well, there's no one for us to. I mean, scrimming will be less of an issue here because the amount of European teams, but
of sure, yeah.
At the equivalent level, there's so many people where it's like, oh well, we can't play today because Billy Bob's got to work his shift in fucking Frankie and Benny's.
Oh yeah. That's kind of what we have, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like you can't. That's not good to an environment. Sure, they'll be able to find scrims because there's so many fucking teams. That's a struggle that NA teams have that European teams won't have. But when you don't have the money there to dedicate your time, you're in this melting pot of what 50. Let's say 50 teams. It's going to be far more than 50 teams, but let's say 50 teams, and you're in this melting pot. And of these 50 teams, there's 10 of you that are unsalaried, and then there's like 20 of you that are part time, and 20 of you that are full time, and the unsalaried ones aren't going to be the ones that rise to the top of that pool. The part time ones might, if it's a special group of players, like a really special group of players. Every time it's going to be the full timers because they've got the means to dedicate their time to wake up in the morning, and it's not, all right, we've got to wait for Jim to get back from his shift at Tesco, and then we can have a look at our demos. Then we can dry run some new strats. Then we can do this. It's these fuckers. They wake up, they get on, they have the little chat about what they're going to do that day, what they want to practice on a map, what they want to achieve in their practice, and then they go out, they fucking do it, they scrim, and the next day they come back in, then they watch their demos from those scrims, and the avenue to success is so much clearer when you've got that in front of you, and
when you can commit, right?
yeah, and it feels like, at least from my perspective, that's something that the UK scene needs more of. Obviously, this is where something like the ITB pipeline kind of helps, because then you've got people with these salaries that can at least, even if the teams are loaned to, not all the players can dedicate, then you'd hope some of these pipeline players can at least sit there for the 4 hours they're waiting for someone and just put that time into themselves and their career.
Yeah, I think
You'd hope.
You'd hope.
I think the thing
They're still from the UK.
Just what you said there, right? Where the 50 teams, 10 unsalaried. When one of those 10 unsalaried teams does win, right? Like we see this in advance sometimes, they make advanced playoffs. Nothing changes. They can beat. We've had orgless teams in Premier, for God's sake. Like we've had these top teams in Challenger League, whatever, right? At the top level, unorged, unsalaried, and then they'll get an offer. Right, I've seen some of these offers. They'll get an offer and they'll be like, "Yeah, we'll give you 75 quid a month." It's like, but we expect you to prac 5-6 days a week, and we expect you to do this and do that. And it's like, but then there are, and you know, I'm not trying to cause anything, but there are other scenes that are in Maine, right, salaried to play.
Well,
And
this is where it's ridiculous, right?
I think UK scene has it the worst. Like it's
Yeah.
awful.
You'll
one of
get.
the worst.
This is where it's ridiculous though, because you'll get some people, and yeah, you know, there's cost of living in different places as well, and that's obviously going to affect things. But
Forgot.
you know, you'll get some teams, and esports is a very fucking weird place, and Valorant especially is a great example of it, where at the top people get paid so much money that I'm sure you two have both had it when, you know, you're explaining esports and what you do for work to someone at like a family thing, and they're like, well, how much do the players get paid? And you're like, what, like a tier 1 level? And you say it, and they're like, well, they just sit there playing video games. Like, that, that's a ridiculously high level that is probably too high for the industry, and we're going to see that brought down. I'm pretty sure that LEC has just had a salary cap put in.
Sure.
So you're going to see things like this come down as the esports bubble continues to actually maybe not burst, because maybe CS2 is going to bring some investment back in. But it's going to find itself in a healthier state at the end of it. But it feels like the problem that the UK scene has is that, yes, some salaries are unseriously high, but the UK scene, it's just unseriously low. It's at a point where, yeah, if you get given 75 quid a month, right? Like, I spend that in a pub in a month,
Yeah.
minimum. So
in a night.
Spend that. I was
Well,
gonna say that's a night thing in
no,
Dublin.
okay. That's the quiet couple of drinks I go with my one mate on a Thursday, so we see each other. That's the
75 quid, yeah.
month for that. So, you know, what are these players meant to fucking do when it's like, okay, we're going to give you something that's essentially pocket money
Yeah.
that you can't do anything with your life. I mean, that in the UK right now, that's probably not even free driving lessons. These kids, a lot of them are at the age where they want
Less
to
than
go out
one.
and learn to drive. Less than one. How much the
Oh
fuck is the
no,
driving
sorry.
20
lesson in
quid or less
Ireland?
than, but
No,
alright,
no,
mate.
no, 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 no,
I was
sorry.
gonna say,
Sorry,
like, fuck me.
I'm sorry. Ignore me.
I was
Fuck
like, what?
me, Freddie.
No, I got them mixed up.
But you know, like, what are these kids meant to do with
Yeah,
that much
it's
fucking money? And you're asking them to be
Yeah.
professional. Like,
Yeah.
it's bollocks.
And we
It's
could talk
also
about that all day as well.
Yeah, it's also a lot of people might not realize, but invites to these type of tournaments. It's obviously HLTV ranking is a big part, but it's also being a part of an organization. Verdant, who had literally come top 16, no, top 8 at a CCT, and they beat like Cold Zero's team 2-0 and almost beat and like contested Monty to like a close 2-0. They weren't getting any invites under their like August banner, even though they'd literally like come top 8 at one of their events.
Who
The
were they
day
within August?
the free.
The free. Right.
Literally, they told me the day the org announcement came out, they got an offer for a tournament, and that is the weight that it has of being an organization. And you see, like X Coalesce when they had all their like right now, like that team was making consistent games in CCTs, which it is a big deal for us. Like it's a big deal for us, like these type of players. But as soon as they're X Coalesce, they like you haven't seen them, and they haven't got any worse. If anything, they may have got better in a sense. Like you've still got Docs like improving every day, and like even though they lost to AZUWU, they've brought in Tree, who's equally as good of a player.
Yeah, we should have mentioned him. Honestly, he's
Tree
another
is
up-and-comer.
also and it's just really unfortunate. I think the UK scene is really just continuously fucked by money, and I like Prem's loss. That's less money, even though it was barely any anyways. Love Epic Land, but like that's pennies in the end.
Yeah, that's
iSeries no
experience
money.
more than money anyway.
Like in the UK scene, there's no reason to invest because there's no tournaments and there's no avenue to make the money if you're an organization. And then if you're a player, you can't make money. And I think it's crazy that we've got to level of at the level we are as a scene, and it's so at the crux of it, awfully just everything. The UK scene's awful in the end, and
So-
I think the fact that we've got here is actually so impressive.
So before we move on to the final thing I want to talk about then, which will be events, do you guys think that with CS2 and hopefully a heightened interest in Counter-Strike post-COVID, that maybe numbers-wise was there, but in terms of organizations, because we're already slightly seeing it in North America, do you think maybe there'll be more orgs that actually take investment seriously coming into the UK?
So
Can I just say one thing about the difference between US and UK? The US has people coming back. We don't have that. That's I think a big difference with Valorant and CS2 and stuff like that. Of like, we don't really have that connection of like all these like numbers coming over. Like that's not really happening in the UK, and I think that's something that is helping NA a lot, but it's not really going to support us. But yeah, that's kind of something I wanted to say.
So, Daf, what were you going to say about this idea of money coming in?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, yeah, I mean, we mentioned a lot of negatives there, and I think there definitely are. But I think
Taking the copium pipe out of our mouth a little bit, I think.
But I think just to bring it back in, not complete copium, but why people would invest is basically the question we're asking right now.
Yeah.
And the reason why to invest in UKCS is there are good players, but also the reputation has now slightly increased. 5 years ago, you weren't seeing some UK player that, Sam, let's be honest, you probably had never heard of joining Sprout Academy. It wasn't happening. You know what I'm saying? So now there is this genuine thing, because 5 years ago it was like, well, if I sign some UK guy, he's gonna fuck about and he's not gonna try, and because that's a reputation they have, right? It's not just the orgs that have that reputation. It's not just the top players. It was a scene-wide thing of these guys aren't gonna try if I sign them. Whereas now, I think the reputation has slightly shifted. Whether that be Paris, whether that just be, I think a big thing of it was the amount of support that came out of the woodworks for ITB. You know, it just shows that there is a UK fan base as well. So that's just another reason to pick up a UK player. There is a brand surrounding them. Whereas before it was like, oh, well, there's nobody who cares about the UK players. You know, if you've got two equal players here who are both good level, and one of them has good branding and their scene loves them and cares about them and is going to support you because you've signed them, you're going to sign this player. And another huge thing that's also happening in the UK scene is the orgs are making their players do content. And this is great. Viperio, Verdant, ITB, they were doing content with their players. They were shooting bloody documentaries. They were doing, stuff like that. So now these European orgs can look at UK players and go, oh, they're good. They have a branding. They want to do content. This is all the reasons to sign them because, in a European level, orgs don't just care about how good you are. They've got to make money off you. They've got to get sponsorships off you. They've got to make a brand out of you. So if you're just some dull guy who doesn't want to do content, doesn't have a brand, even if you're really good, if there's a player who's similar level, they're gonna pick you. We've seen this time and time again, right?
Yeah.
So I think the UK scene has that going. Like we now understand ourselves a lot better. And I think ITB at the major helped a lot with that because they were very witty in interviews. They were, for God's sake, HLTV confirmed. They were constantly trying. They love getting UK people on because they're witty. They give them funny things to say. Bloody Smooya's been on it 5 times and he hasn't been on a team for like a year and a half. You know,
Oh,
they
let's leave him out, please.
He's actually an interesting talking point, but it's more negative
That's
wise.
definitely another topic, I would say. But
Yeah.
I think that we have this like aura of like English is our first language, right? We are a lot of the players coming up have been witty and like, I mean, British humor has always been a big thing. British TV shows go down really well in America and places like that. Like the British humor has always been a thing, right? So there is now a character to these players outside of them just clicking heads and being moody bastards who don't want to turn up to prac, which used to be the reputation. The reputation has shifted, and that will do us so many favors.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
many.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I add on that and also share a funny anecdote of
this
a
better make me
particular.
laugh.
So Connor CS, who's he was the best in the Carve Island for years. Owned Mouse Sports on LAN on 2019 at the V4 Festival. Went to Valorant and was in Movistar, which was like, well, I think a top 5 team at the time.
Riders,
got got
riders.
got
Not-
riders got kicked from the team because after a tournament when they got knocked out, tweeted out, "God, this team's so toxic." Hashtag Vamos KKK, like a and got kicked from his team. And like that's the reputation we had of people posting dumb shit on Twitter. And I think to add on Daf's point of like it isn't just the Paris majors, like a formulation of years and years of like we just actually have UK teams now. Like we actually have more than 2 teams. They're actually good teams. People respect the players. The players respect the UK players now. And it's a big thing. Mezzi gives us so much good press. He's such a nice guy. And you compare that to having him at the top of the scene, compare that to having someone like Smooya at the top of the scene, it portrays the UK scene in a much different way. And I think that adds to the positives. And yeah, go Mezzi.
Right. So, before we move on to that final point, because
Bloody
I've got a good content idea now, and you
Okay.
two can decide which one of you's going to do it. But then you've got a minute, because Freddie alluded to it. Why is Smooya a different point, and why is it a point in the negative sense? You've got 1 minute. Go.
Daf,
mean-
I wrote an article about this, so it's on you. Did you read the article?
I mean, okay, I'll go. I think in the past, Smear gave us a reputation of, he was the only UK player ready to make it. He came out of the scene, and then obviously there were a lot of problems with him, and you could see through him that there was a UK fan base because look how popular he was. Look at his streaming career now. But unfortunately, like he was so good, and we could see he was so good. But it just unfortunately from what we heard as an audience was that behind the scenes he was just not ideal, right? That's what we heard as a fan base, just as a not even a UKCS fan, just as a fan. But I think these days, I think he's maybe where he's not playing and he's not in that limelight. He has, from what I've heard, been more supportive in the UK scene. For
Yeah.
ITB especially, he was at the major with them, for example. He was constantly supporting them and giving them messages. So whether he has changed or not is I don't know. I haven't met him. I don't know him personally. But I think when he was at the top, unfortunately, the way he was and how he was quite irresponsible, that is how we got betrayed. And now that we have someone like Mezzi, who obviously portrays himself in a very different way, I think that changes the portrayal of us as well.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Smooya helped the Viperia boys when he went to the RMRs, and I think he's helped Crucial a little bit. Like from what I have heard, he actually has been doing some good work recently. So props, give props where props is
Yeah,
due. To be honest,
right.
there
You
like
can't just
it's not
shit on him
yeah.
constantly.
He has in a UK sense, he seemingly has changed a little bit, which is better to hear. It's because it's what you want.
Yeah.
Because as Dad said, he's fucking insane. Like you cannot deny he is sick.
But in tier 2, very bad in tier 1.
I mean, he's had like a month experience in tier 1. That's just like,
Yeah,
He was on
okay.
big. What do you mean?
oh shit, sorry, I forgot about that.
What
I mean,
do you mean?
he made a finals.
He's
He
very much
made
a
a
tier 2.
finals.
He's very much a
He
tier
made
2
a
AWPer.
finals at Cologne.
Very much a tier 2 AWPer. But okay, the final point then, because obviously there's been some huge news from ESL recently, and every time Freddie, you or fucking Flows comes back from an Epic or an Insomnia, you're always fucking moaning about something new, whether it's the scheduling or the money or just the way the event
We don't moan
works.
about Epic. Nobody moans about
I
Epic.
was gonna
Maybe it's
say,
not Epic
fucking
then.
come
I
back
don't
and
give a
love it.
Alright, I don't give a fuck. It's one of these local shitlands. But okay, you come back and there are complaints. There are always complaints. Maybe not Epic,
Kind of
but
thing.
at least Insomnia. The loss of Prem, the events at the moment. Does there need to be some form of shift, or is everything that we've said in the last 56 minutes going to go to waste because the events that make the UK scene so special and make it what it is, are they just going to go away? Like, are they not going to be at the standard? Where are we at
No,
in terms of that?
it's looking good, but we can't say too much. It's really unreleased and hidden, but shit's doing well. Loss of Prem on one part, we're fucked. On the other hand, certain groups are stepping up. There's this new tournament as well that is public. What's the name of it? Is it the Tolpars Reloaded? It's not too much, but it's a UK team and UK qualifiers that might go to Turkey. That's something. That's one thing that we can speak about. But there is something really big in the woodworks being cooked up. I think the loss of Prem was really bad, really bad. But because it kind of takes away like a pathway to in the UK scene of like UK teams actually progressing regionally, and the progression regionally translates to internationally, and you see that a lot in Germany, like the Meisterschaft tournament. You are wanting to have a German team so you can play at Cologne. Poland, you are wanting to have a Polish team so you can play at Katowice. In the UK, why do you want to have a UK team? Well, luckily we do have some stuff coming up, and that's gonna be really fucking cool when it happens. But I think that also comes down to the players. It's really cool that we have the BCSA now because they're actually relaying feedback. Because before, mentioning no names, Fraser, LVN, like these people just crying on Twitter 24/7, and like none of the feedback is being relayed in any positive manner. And they're like, why is nothing working? Because you're just saying unconstructive stuff on Twitter. Finally, that's changing. Finally, we're seeing some sort of information being relayed over. And I think Alan is doing God's work over at BCSA. However, he did say that a lot of stuff in the next couple of weeks is going to define how that association progresses. So hopefully it defines it in a positive manner, because we could really do with having a very good backbone of this scene. And there's a lot of stuff coming up. I don't think we can mention what it is, but it's going to be really fucking cool.
So helpful. There's something happening where I can't mention it, but it's really
You know what I'm talking about, right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, and it's gonna be good. It's better than Prem. It's bigger and better. It incorporates UKCS, which has been a massive like restrictment of you've had the two different scenes. Like UKCS apparently is massive in the UK scene. It's just that it's there.
And it's
And
really fucking fun to play in.
yeah,
Really fucking fun.
and like that's an actual development pipeline where people care about it. Imagine if we put them together.
Yeah. So I think yeah, what Freddie alluding to is good there, but I think the next year is the make or break, right? I mean, losing ESL Prem sucks. Like, just fundamentally, I think it had so many problems, but the last one was like, oh, maybe we can, like, I can fix her kind of thing. That's what everybody's kind of idea was coming into ESL Prem. It was like, I can fix her. I can do something positive here.
What's happening?
But now it's gone.
Such a disarray, man.
She's left.
She's
kid-
gone.
the
She's brought the kids. The kids have
kids-
gone.
The kids are gone. So it's just about finding a new partner now. And hopefully, in the UK scene, that partner will be better. So that's my analogy to end. To end the show.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do an outro now because I'm worried you two have lost your minds. I'm worried I have lost the room, and quite
Thank you,
frankly,
guys.
I'm not sure what you both did within the last minute and a half because Freddie did some strange shit. You
Endpoint
said
are
some
gonna win
strange shit,
Copenhagen,
Daf.
guys. I tell you now.
Yeah, Endpoint are
Um,
going to Copenhagen. AZUWU's going to get MVP of the major. Mighty
Yeah.
Max is going to go to FaZe and then win the Grand Slam. There you go.
Right, well, my outro just got ruined. Thanks, guys. But yeah,
No worries.
he
No
might be
worries.
a dirty blue-nosed bastard, but long live Mezzy.
Yeah, Granny
And,
Knocker's best org in the UK.
Let's
Binmen,
not get
up the
ahead of
Binmen,
ourselves.
up the
Let's,
Binmen.
let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Binmen.
But so yeah,
Binmen till I die.
let us know in the comments down below. How many times have you laughed at the UK scene? And if you're part of the UK scene, are you hopeful for CS2? And other than that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Harry's still not going to be back next week. I'll figure out some shit to come and talk to you about. But thank you, Freddie, even though you're here all the time and I'm sick of you now.
I finally was allowed on.
Thank you, Daf, especially because
You're
you
welcome.
were just plucked from the ether for this. And I've been Sam Animo Mackenzie. He's been David Glenn. He's been Freddie, or Grimmy Rannar, the Swiss Army knife of esports, Pritchard. And I'll catch you in the next one.